So in this quick tutorial, we will take a look at parallelism. We'll start with the definition, then we'll take a look at a definition of what's called faulty parallelism, and then we'll take a look at some examples. And hopefully, once we're through here, you'll have an idea of how to avoid faulty parallelism in your own work and how to create parallel structures that are actually quite satisfying for the reader. So let's start with our definition. Parallelism occurs when we repeat a pattern in a sentence, and this pattern can be used to either save time, present a list, or emphasize an idea. So this second sentence in my definition is actually an example of parallelism, because what I have here is a phrase, a group of words in a list, and they're all starting with a verb, right? And this works because this pattern can be used to save time, this pattern can be used to present a list, or this pattern can be used to emphasize an idea. Those sentences all make sense on their own, but I've combined them in a way that is parallel, where the pattern I'm creating is of the same kind of thing, starting with those verbs, and is of the same kind of weight. All right, so let's take a quick look at a definition of what faulty parallelism is. This occurs when that potential pattern is broken. This occurs when either one element is not part of the pattern or the weight of that pattern is inconsistent. So let's take a look at some examples of correct parallelism, and we'll move towards those examples of the faulty parallelism. So again, just like my list here, we have another list, a very short selection of sentences. I play hockey, I play soccer, I play volleyball. Most writers would not write their sentences this way. We would tend to unite these sentences, combine them by creating one parallel structure. I play hockey, comma, soccer, comma, and volleyball. And this works because hockey, soccer, and volleyball are the same kinds of things. They're nouns, specifically sports. But they also have the same kind of weight, one word, right? So this is a very common, simple example of parallelism. Here's a more complex one from a speech delivered by Martin Luther King. Go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. All right. So clearly we see that repetition at the beginning of the sentences. Should remind you of an anaphora, a term we've studied before. But it's also an example of parallelism because we have the same structure repeated. And as we noted in our definition, one of the advantages of a parallel structure, it allows you to emphasize an idea. And I think this is what Martin Luther King Jr. was attempting to do with this particular sentence, is emphasize this idea and build towards a dramatic conclusion. So let's take a look at a few other sentences so we can see what this might actually look like in faulty parallelism. So this first example is an example of faulty parallelism because the pattern isn't maintained. The student scrunched up his test, threw it in the trash, and the door was slammed by him on the way out. So we have our pattern, right? We have scrunched up his test, right? It's a phrase. We have scrunched up as a verb. We have threw it in the trash, which again start with another verb, a phrase, a group of words together. So the reader needs to see that maintained. Instead, what we have here is a clause. The door was slammed by him on the way out. So it's starting actually with the subject of a clause, the door. And while the idea by itself makes sense, it doesn't flow with the rest of the sentence. In fact, what we should be able to do in a parallel structure is I should be able to delete that pattern. And this is the beginning of the pattern. And if I delete it, the sentence should make sense. So let's see what happens. The student, the door was slammed by him on the way out. Well, clearly we have a problem here, right? Because I've clearly broken that pattern. The easiest way to perhaps fix this sentence would be to write the student scrunched up his test, threw it in the trash, and slammed the door, right? Now we have that pattern maintained of verb, verb, verb. If I go back and I attempt to delete the earlier part of the pattern, the student slammed the door makes sense, right? So we've taken this sentence that had faulty parallelism and changed it so now it is an effective parallel structure. Now, that addressed the the repetition of the pattern, right? The same kinds of things. Another element of faulty parallelism has to do with the weight of those sections. So even if we start with the same sort of ideas, sometimes if the weight of those within the structures aren't effective, it can be displeasing to the reader. So let's take a look at this sentence. The past century has been defined by a dramatic increase in international trade, radical social and political ideologies, and tech. Now, I could have written technology, but I wrote tech to actually emphasize to you how out of place this feels. We have a pattern through which the reader has created interest, and this pattern is based on ending with a noun, trade, ideologies, right, and somewhat abstract nouns, and strong terminology at the beginning that suggests how important this is, right? We're starting in both cases with an adjective, right? Dramatic increase in international trade, radical social and political ideologies, and tech. So I can switch this to technology. It's a little better. If I go back to my original premise that I should be able to delete the pattern, it should make sense. Well, the past century has been defined by technology. Yeah, it makes sense, but the problem is still that the sentence feels out of balance, doesn't it? I mean, again, this pattern of, in the first one, dramatic increase in international trade features 5 words, radical social and political ideologies, 5 words. And the last component of that pattern, technology, just doesn't have the same weight. So what we need to do is maintain that weight by adding more, something that perhaps gives us a bit of a description of technology. So perhaps we try something like this. Past century has been defined by a dramatic increase in international trade, radical social and political ideologies, and staggering innovations in technology. Now, not only do we have that balance that we mentioned before, that caused by having the same kind of pattern, the same components in the pattern, we now have that pattern sharing, the elements of that pattern sharing the same weight, and it's much more satisfying for the reader, and it does allow you to really emphasize that idea and the ideas in your sentence. And if you can do this effectively, your sentence